Good afternoon. It is Monday. We are actually finally in the last week of the 21-day challenge. Today is a great day. It is Eid for those celebrating Eid across the world. To all my brothers and sisters that are celebrating Eid, I wish you Eid Mubarak. May it bring you peace, joy, and equanimity. And may the year be a blessed one. As we start this day and we start this month, let us refocus on what's important to us. We've been talking about that. We've been talking about our thoughts. We've been talking about how to restructure our thoughts. Yesterday, we talked about first principle thinking. And so today we are actually going to move a step further and we're going to start talking about a little bit more in terms of how we change that thinking, the thought process, because as I said, everything starts with a thought, right? Thought creates action. And then in between in there, we have these feelings or emotions, and we can almost override that feeling or emotion if we go straight from thought to action. And now, of course, that emotion changes when we go to action. Today, I'm struggling with a bit of a cold, so I'm maybe coughing or having to have some fluids in between. But let's just review what we talked about yesterday, right? First principle thinking is really actively questioning everything you know. And today we're going to build on that. So when you do that, you're able to discover sort of the atomic level elements that make everything work. Right? First, we need to identify and define what you assume to be true about the problem. You break the problem down into fundamental principles. We create new solutions from those fundamental principles. And we're going to break that down even furthermore. Yesterday, I did give you 5 different ways to look at it. Today, I'm going to work with you in terms of introducing to a phenomenal spiritual guide. Her name is Katie Byron. Now, in her early 30s, Katie was so depressed and stuck in self-loathing that she was unable to get out of bed for days, a week at a time. And so one morning, in a sudden moment of a life-changing insight, she saw that her suffering was actually coming from her thoughts. Think about that, right? Her suffering was coming from her thoughts about what situation she was facing, such as, my life is horrible, or somebody did wrong to her, or you don't deserve happiness, or you don't deserve success. And not from the situation itself. It was actually from her thought. So she realized a simple truth. When she believed her thoughts, she suffered. And when she didn't, she was happy. And out of this insight, she developed a process of self-inquiry, which she now calls the work. It involves asking 4 simple questions about each belief that causes us pain. And today we're going to go through those 4, and that's why it's called the 4 questions, right? First is it true? The second question then becomes, can you absolutely know that it's true? Third is, how do you react when you believe that thought? And 4, who would you be without that thought? Right? We all tell ourselves stories. What would we be without that story? So let's dig deeper. But before we do that, I want to have this quote that I want to read to you. And she says, I discovered that when I believed my thoughts, I suffered. When I didn't believe them, I didn't suffer. And that is true for every human being. Freedom is as simple as that. All of the suffering that goes on inside our minds is not reality. It's just that we torture ourselves. Byron Katie says that she has a simple, completely a replicable system for actually freeing ourselves of the thoughts that make us suffer. And she goes on to say that all war begins on paper. So write down the stresses, the thoughts that you're getting, and then let's go through the 4 questions, right? So the 4 questions, like we say, the first one is it true? If it's true, can you absolutely know that it is true? And if it's not true, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? And in the end, we want to ask, who or what would we be without that thought? So let's dig in deeper. right? So the first question is it true? This question can actually change your life, right? Be still. And that's really the key. Do not ask this question with a busy mind. You need to be with yourself. Take some time just on your own so that you're not being distracted, so that you're not have other thoughts that are coming in. Be still and ask yourself if the thought that you wrote down is true. Now, for our purposes today, we're going to ask the question based on, let's say you have a friend and his name is Paul, and you say, Paul should understand me. So is it true? Is it true that he should understand you? Be still. Wait for the heart's response, whether that stands true for you. Should Paul understand you? Your thought is, Paul should understand me. So you ask the question, is it true that Paul should understand you? Right? So once we do that and we have an answer for that, whether that's a yes or a no, you then ask the question, if it's yes or no, can you absolutely know it's true? So the question is, Paul should understand me. Can you absolutely know that it's true? This is another opportunity to open your mind and go deeper into the unknown. Often we answer the questions in a peripheral manner, right? We answer it on a peripheral manner because we want to be able to answer what we think it is. We need to go deeper into it and go deep inside us to find the answers that that stay or are alive beneath what we think and we know. So can you absolutely know that it's true? Ultimately, can you really know what he should or should not understand? Can you absolutely know what is in his best interest to understand? So we talked about earlier about going into judgments and going into expectations, and both of those are coming into play over here. When you go into judgment, then you are already judging that Paul should know without knowing his circumstances or what's going through his mind. The second thing is you have an expectation. When you have an expectation, there's only 100% chance that you're actually going to be disappointed. So let's investigate that statement again. Paul should understand me. Can you absolutely know that that's true? And so then the third question is, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? With this question, you begin to notice some internal cause and effect. Do you experience anger? Do you experience stress? Do you experience frustration? See, when you believe the thought, there is a disturbance that can range from mild discomfort to fear or panic. So when you say that Paul should understand and you believe that thought, what comes up? What do you feel? And then the next question becomes, how are you actually reacting to that person or situation you've written about? How do you treat yourself when you believe that thought? And the key is to make a list and make that list as exhaustive as possible. Just keep on writing, right? Do you experience anger, stress, frustration? And when you believe that thought that Paul should understand, how do you start treating Paul? Do you give him the cold shoulder? Do you give him the look? Do you try to change him in any way? Do you try and avoid him? Remember the example that we talked about, that my boss is mad at me. So we start avoiding it, right? How do these reactions feel when you actually avoid that person, or you make that person not within, if you give them the look, but you're not in allowance of them? How do you start treating yourself? And this is really key, right? We start treating ourselves differently as well. because we start bringing stress and we know the impact of stress. So do you go pale? Does your heart start beating faster? Do you start eating stuff? All of that starts with that thought. Once you've written everything down, then you need to be still and listen. Listen to yourself. Remember, at the subconscious level that we talked about, 90% of that information resides there. And so you already have the answers within you. You just have to dig deep to get to those subconscious level. And so the final question would be, who would you be without that thought? Who or what could you be without that thought? Close your eyes. Picture yourself in the presence of Paul in this situation without believing the thought. How would your life be different if you didn't have the ability to even think the stressful thought? How would you feel? Which do you prefer is the question. Life with or without that particular thought? Which feels kinder, more peaceful? What do you see? What do you feel? And it feels light, then that's the truth. If it feels heavy, then you need to reevaluate all of these questions. Which one did you miss? Where did you miss? Bring it to your light. I always say that your body knows whether it's right or wrong by how you feel. If you feel light and relaxed, then it's the truth. Our body and subconscious mind is very much like a switch. It's either on or it's either off. It's either true or it's either false. And if you can grasp that and be able to tune into your body, these 4 questions actually become quite easy to replicate, like Byron Katie says. And it becomes part of your life that you don't actually have to go through all of these in detail unless you come across a major situation. But the more you practice, the more you become in tune with it. Now, the 5th step, which I did not mention, is to actually turn around the thought. The turnaround gives you an opportunity to experience the opposite of what you believed. Once you have found 1 or more turnarounds to your original statement, you're invited at least to write at least 3 and look at how they work turnaround. For example, Paul should understand me turns around to I should understand me. I should understand Paul. Paul should not understand me. These are 3 separate sentences, right? I should understand me. Rather than Paul should understand me, I should understand me. If you understand yourself, you don't need somebody else to understand you. I should understand Paul. Then you take care of all of those judgments and expectations because now you are understanding where Paul is coming from. And when you take away this expectation that Paul shouldn't understand me, then there is no thought that's pulling you down. Let yourself fully experience the turnaround. For each one, find at least 3 specific, genuine examples where the turnaround is true for you in this situation. This is not about blaming yourself or feeling guilty. It's about discovering alternatives that can bring you inner peace. The turnaround statement is a little different, right? And when you put yourself back in that position to say, you know what, I don't want to have a disagreement with Paul, or I'm willing to experience an argument with Paul, even if he doesn't understand me. I look forward to having a conversation with Paul about this again. See how that makes you feel. And if it's still heavy, if your heart is not at peace with that, that means you have not fully processed this. The turnaround statement is welcoming all your thoughts and experiences with open arms, as it shows where you are with the reality that's at place, or you're still in your mind. And at any point, if you feel any resistance, then the work is not done. When you can honestly look forward to experience that has been previously uncomfortable, there is no longer of anything to fear in life. You see everything as a gift that can bring self-realization, because remember, when you're in peace, you're at love, and fear and love cannot coexist, as we spoke about it earlier. Only one of those emotions can stay with you. So when you're with love, the fear, that anger, the stress, all of that is gone. You remain in equanimity. And here is another great quote by Byron Katie. As long as you think that the cause of your problems is out there, as long as you think that anyone or anything is responsible for your suffering, we can put setback over here, the situation is hopeless. It means that you are forever in the role of a victim, that you're suffering in the paradise that we live in. I am going to share a story with you that I've been postponing for a while. And the story may not directly imply, but I want you to understand from the story of how our thoughts can actually just change depending on how we look at things, right? So the question is, how do you know you are rich? This is an amazing answer that was provided by an IIT student. So when this gentleman was doing his university, there was a professor who used to teach mechanics to him. And his lectures used to be very interesting since he had an interesting way to teach and explain concepts. One day in the class, the professor asked the following question: what is zero? What is infinity? And can zero and infinity be the same? Right? What is zero? What is infinity? And can zero and infinity be the same? Now, everyone thought that they knew the answers, and the replies came as following. Zero means nothing. Infinity means a number greater than any countable number. Remember, these are science students. They're in mechanics, they're in IT. So zero and infinity are opposite, and they can never be the same. The professor countered by first talking about infinity and asked, how can there be any number which is greater than any countable number? And the students had no answer. So he then explained the concept of infinity in a very interesting way, which is great to remember. He said that imagine that there is an illiterate shepherd who can only count up to 20. Now, if the number of sheep he has is less than 20 and you ask him how many sheep he has, he can tell you the precise number, like 3 or 5 or 15. However, if the number is more than 20, he is likely to say too many. He then explained that in science, infinity actually means too many and not uncountable. And in the same way, zero means too few and not nothing. An example is that if we take the diameter of the earth as compared to the distance between earth and the sun, the diameter of the earth can be said to be zero since it's too small, right? If we compare the diameter of the earth compared to the distance between the earth and the sun, the diameter of the earth is so small compared to that distance between the earth and the sun that it can be said that it's too small. However, when we compare that same diameter of the earth with the size of a grain, the diameter of the earth can be said to be infinite. Hence, the professor concluded that the same thing that can be zero and infinite, let me repeat that. He then concluded that the same thing can be zero and infinite at the same time, depending on the context or your matrix of comparison. The relationship between riches and poverty is similar to the relationship between infinity and zero. The relationship between our thoughts of what we think it is and what it is actually very similar to this. It depends on what you're comparing it to. It depends what your expectations are. It depends on how you're analyzing. It all depends on the scale of comparison with your wants. You want Paul to understand you. If your income is more than your wants, you're rich. If your wants are more than your income, you're poor. It is not how much money you have. Now, somebody once told me how much a rich man was asked, how much money is enough? And he said, $1 more than I have, which means his wants exceeded his needs or his income. And so he always wanted $1 more. If your if your wants are less than your income, you're rich. You do not become rich by acquiring lots of money, but by progressively reducing your wants. If you can reduce your wants, you can become rich at this moment. If you can reduce your expectations, you can become happy. If you can reduce the amount of thoughts that are negative, you actually head towards that happiness. I hope that I was able to take this example and be able to put it together for you in this. I thank you. I have gone again over by 5 minutes, but I hadn't shared the story with you for so long. And so today was the day to do that. I want to thank you all for being here today. Again, to all my Muslim friends, brothers and sisters, wishing you all Eid Mubarak. Have a wonderful day.